Welcome to the show. We've got a great lineup of guests. We've got Richard Medhust coming on. We have CIA Larry Johnson coming on. And we have Anthony Aguilar coming on. It's going to be a great set of interviews. It's going to be golden. So in the meantime, retweet the space or video or share it everywhere. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know, guys, on the YouTube. Is the audio working? That would be awesome. Richard, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let's just see. I think Richard may be still having problems. Let me just message him.
Yeah, I can't hear you at all, mate.
Settings on audio. Okay, I'm just telling him. Okay, cool. Should be fine. We're just going to get him on in a couple of seconds. I've sent him a message. What about now? Can you hear me? Let me send him a message. Open chat. Private chat. Richard Medhust. Okay. Let me get StreamYard up for Richard. We'll do it on StreamYard instead. Okay, cool. Let me add myself. And 1 second, I'm just gonna send it to him. Well, I need to send it to myself first so I can send it to him. So it should be good. We're gonna get Richard on. I really am interested in his theory. I think it's gonna be really good. Okay, sorted. Don't like StreamYard as much because I can't chill. So make sure my settings are right. Camera, audio, sorted. Okay. So should be sorted. Should be coming on any minute now. It's gonna be a great interview. Watch out for it. Gonna be fire. Got Richard Medhust coming on. What, we're on day 77 now. That's crazy. 77. Okay, cool. So it should be fire. We've got Richard Medhust coming on any second now. Just waiting for him. In the meantime, guys, if you're on YouTube, make sure you let me know if things are working. Is audio fine? Okay, cool. We're just waiting for him to come on. He should be coming on any second now. We just had a bit of technical issues. He is trying to join again. I sent him the StreamYard link. He has seen the StreamYard link, so it should be fine. So we're just waiting for Richard to come on. Should be good. In the meantime, guys, retweet the space, reshare the space, let everybody know we're live. Sorry, I need to get into a situation where this is a bit more streamlined, but I don't know how to do this. Obviously, I haven't got a producer who can test people's audio before they come on. So anyway, should be fine. We've got Richard. Hopefully Richard can hear us. Yes, he can hear us. Brilliant. Okay, let's say ready. Okay. Hi, Richard. Can you hear me now?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Awesome.
I hear you now, mate.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's weird. It's just EVMux. Some people do have audio issues, and then it's just a bit weird to sort it out. Shall we get into it? How are you doing anyway?
I'm okay. You know, it's crazy what's happening. Like, I'm not gonna say anything. I'll wait till we start. But yeah, it's crazy. I'm happy to be on.
Brilliant. Let's get started. I just want to welcome investigative journalist Richard Medhust onto the show. This guy has been covering geopolitics for a very long time. And on this issue, in the current Iran war issue, he's got a very unique perspective. Many people think Trump's lost his mind. Many people think he's crazy. Richard doesn't. Richard thinks he's got a defined plan and is to rebuild the PETRO-GAS dollar. And he's going to explain all of that to us. Richard, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be on here. And yeah, I mean, Trump is crazy. So I mean, I'd say he's the face of the plan. That's perhaps like a better way to put it. But yeah, there's definitely a plan at play here with the Americans. Absolutely.
Okay, so explain it. Explain what you think's going down.
Well, you know, the mistake that a lot of us tend to make is talk about the Iran war like it's an isolated event. But you know, Operation Epic Fury didn't start by itself. It's just one of 3 campaigns. So if you pay attention to 2 weeks before, you know, the Americans and Israelis attacked Iran, you had Operation Arctic Sentry, which was started by the US and NATO. And before that, Venezuela, just the month before, they kidnapped President Maduro and then started stealing Venezuela's oil. That's part of Operation Southern Spear. Now, you know, I went and I got the data from, I went and counted and mapped all of these strikes on Russian refineries, on Russian ships, because what really made me go, hold on, this is weird, is when they started this narcotics operation in the Caribbean, right? This is how it all began.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that anti-narcotics operation, you know, it was just a cover. It turned into them pirating Russian ships in the Arctic. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? This makes no sense whatsoever. Right. And that was, of course, the cover they used to kidnap Maduro. So suddenly I'm seeing these 2 connections with oil. There's Russian oil being stolen. It's got nothing to do with narcotics. And there's Venezuela's oil being stolen. It's also got nothing to do with narcotics. So I started piecing these puzzles together, and then I understood what it's got to do with Greenland, etc. So just to zoom out again, you've got 3 operations. All of them are naval blockades. They all started in the same period, and they all target gas and oil-rich countries. So that's Russia, Iran, Venezuela. Okay, and it's Operation Southern Spear, Operation Arctic Sentry, and Operation Epic Fury. So what the Americans are trying to do here is several goals. They're first of all, they're trying to control the oil and gas, because you know the saying that we have where the most obvious answer is usually the correct one. Yeah, the Americans start wars for oil and gas. That's literally the most obvious answer and the clearest one, and it's the correct one. So, you know, this has been true since Iraq and even before that. And I don't know why that a lot of people have kind of shifted away from talking about that. It is the primary objective. And so when they're targeting all of these countries, they want to control the flow of oil and gas so that they can drive up the sales of American gas to China as well and to the planet. And we should remember that the Americans, they're not the same country that people think they were, back in the 1970s. Like, if you closed Hormuz in the 1970s, they'd really be in trouble, because even in the 70s, they could produce a lot of oil, but they consumed so much that they still had a deficit. They still had to import more oil just to meet that demand. That's not the case today. The Americans are the #1 producers of oil and gas. They're the #1 exporters of LNG, and they just became, because of this war, net exporters of crude oil. So that's the first time since World War II they're exporting more crude oil than they import. That is absolutely insane. And that really tells you how strategic this conflict is. So it's not about Trump, like whether he's an idiot or not, because this plan has been in the works for decades. And I can come back to that, like who really started this, but there is absolutely a plan here. And let's put it a different way. Even if you want to say like all of these things were pure coincidence, it's working out for the United States. And that's really the point here, is that this idea that they are weakened as a country, or as a superpower rather, it's just simply not true. Like, I've covered BRICS more than most people. And if you know, and I covered the humiliations in this war by Iran on their bases and their radar systems. Like, if they were suffering geostrategically, I would be the first one to tell you. But they're really not. As a matter of fact, they're even stronger than before, 6 months ago, for example. And the dollar is not going anywhere. Like right now, the Americans are selling their highest amounts of gas and oil to Europe and Asia in history, period. Like that is how profitable this whole situation is. So when they're closing the Strait of Hormuz, they're doing that on purpose. And it's not just Hormuz, it's the Caribbean and it's the Arctic. It's all three of these blockades in one campaign, right? It's one campaign. It's not just in Iran.
Okay, I've got a few questions for you on that then. So in terms of the US, from my understanding, there's two issues they have. They basically consume a lot of energy themselves. And so their export, I believe, is 50%, if I'm right. And they also need to export crude oil, which is more thin, but they bring in more heavier crude oil. So doesn't that basically present them a problem where they're not able to bring in that more thicker oil?
Well, that's the thing. That's why they took Venezuela.
Right.
It's precisely for this oil. It's a very good point that you raised, and I'm really glad you did, because that sour, heavy crude, the one that Venezuela has is so thick. They call it a sludge, right? Like it's almost like goo in your hands.
Yeah.
So those refineries that they have in the Gulf of Mexico, that Trump now calls Gulf of America, right? It's basically like in Texas, Louisiana. What is the deep South really? Is really this hub of oil and gas for the United States. And what they're trying to do is basically turn that into the Middle East, right? I can come back to that after, but this heavy sour crude, that's why they took Venezuela. I think that's why they did it before Iran, because it was not just to have that supply of thick sludge that their refineries in Texas and in the Gulf of Mexico are designed to produce, but it's also because they wanted to make sure that whatever war they start in Iran, and the blockades that they were going to put in the Arctic and in Hormuz don't destabilize oil too much. So that's why you have Chevron that are going in now in Venezuela and what they call developing, right? Which is really just a nice way of saying stealing, that sludge. And it's one of the reasons the US are now a net exporter of crude oil. Like, we should be really clear that when they break this record, for the first time since World War II, it's not because they have that that much infrastructure and oil themselves. They do, of course, but it's because they stole the Venezuelan oil in addition, right? It's very important to point that out, that they are using the stolen reserves under their control now to also boost their production. That's really the whole point. It's like piracy. You steal someone else's cargo and then sell it as your own. So it's really what's going on here. And that thick sludge that you mentioned, it's really interesting, because I talked about this as multi-layered gains. So, Venezuela used to give 4%, used to supply 4% of China's imports. So instead of China's teapot refineries cooking that sludge and refining it, which is really what they're designed to do. So, it's like if I wanted to compare a pressure cooker. Like you wouldn't boil, the kettle to make tea or coffee in a pressure cooker, because that would be a humongous waste of energy. You would just do it in a kettle. So that's kind of the equivalent with the teapots, right? Like, if you want to fire those things up, they are so power hungry and efficient that really the only time you should fire them up is when you give them stuff like the oil from Venezuela. And that's the same exact idea with the refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. So China mitigated this by also using Iranian and Russian oil. And that oil is much thinner. You don't need to put it in a teapot refinery like that. But because they received it so cheap, it was basically worth their while to do it anyway, right? So they had these like three oil supplies, Venezuela, Iran, and Russia, in the teapot refineries. And that's exactly what the Americans have disrupted, and are now funneling that Venezuelan oil to their own equivalent of the teapot refineries. And the thin shale oil that you mentioned, what they're doing with that, instead of refining it inefficiently themselves, so instead of firing up a pressure cooker in America to refine thin shale oil, which is really not efficient and a waste of money, they're keeping that on the shelf and exporting it to Europe and Asia and making money like from a second revenue stream. But not just that, they're doing it at wartime prices because they've created a constricted supply of oil and gas on the planet. So all the prices of oil have gone up. So they're profiting from the fact that oil has gone up, and they're sending their cheap shale oil to what used to be cheap shale oil to Europe and Asia at 10 times the price. So it's basically what I call multi-layered gains. And it really shows you how someone had to sit down and think all of this stuff through, because it's impossible to just be pure coincidence.
So another question I have for you is, my understanding was when they invaded Venezuela and stole their oil, that the oil industry were having issues with the type of oil that Venezuela produces, and they didn't have the refining process in the United States of America. Are you saying they've got it, or are they in the what's happening with that?
No, they've got it. What's missing is the infrastructure in Venezuela. And ironically, that's because of US sanctions, right? Yeah. Like if you go and look back at George W. Bush, he's the one who started piling these sanctions on Venezuela. And then Obama continued that, and then Biden and Trump, and then Biden and Trump again. And so, what they've been doing is, of course, using those sanctions to starve the population in Venezuela, but also force them to basically hand over control and ownership of those resources to American companies. And it's really, really weird because they were already exporting. The United States were already one of their top customers anyway. But I went back because I remember there was these meetings with Dick Cheney in 2001, as soon as he became vice president. And he had these secret meetings with like 40 meetings with all these oil executives from BP, from Chevron, from ExxonMobil. Really, like, it's exactly what you're thinking, like this shady secret of bunch of executives and board members meeting in some smoke-filled room. It's exactly that, because they tried until 2007 to keep those meetings secret, and they produced this national energy policy, which is like a blueprint for America's energy strategy. And that's what Trump is implementing. It's not his idea. In that document, they point out how crucial it is to have Venezuela's oil, right? They don't say explicitly we should go and invade it, but they basically make it implicitly clear that they need that oil, and they want to depend less on other countries like Iran or anyone else, and have the Western Hemisphere, which Trump keeps rambling on about, be the center of oil and gas production, not just for America, but globally, as basically in terms of market share. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And so, yes, they absolutely do have these refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. They've been there for decades, actually. But, the Americans want to make sure that they're using them because they are so expensive to build. And that Venezuelan sludge is exactly what you want to put in those refineries, those pressure cookers, so to speak. They are perfect for this, and they're the American equivalent of those teapots. So, like I said, it not only makes those refineries in the Gulf of Mexico run at maximum efficiency, which increases the money they make, but they also sell their the thin shale oil at wartime prices. So they're winning all around. And on top of that, they're depriving China of a critical source of energy. And yesterday, Trump is going to Beijing and basically, capitalizing on all of this stuff that he's done, which is now we're going to sell you the oil that we have taken away from Venezuela, that we are blocking from Iran. You're going to get all of that from America. We're going to sell you the oil and gas, and you're going to basically become part of a captive market, which is what the US did to Europe after Ukraine.
Okay, great points. And a couple of more questions on this. And by the way, I'm asking just to kind of clarify and illuminate your position. What's your also, from my understanding, America produces about 10 million barrels of oil. They export about 50% of that. The total production of oil is like 100 million barrels. How could they kind of corner the market when they're producing so less? Or are you saying once you add the controlling factor of Venezuela and other countries, then the numbers get higher?
Yeah, you have to understand that you look at American oil output in terms of what their factories or their wells and refineries put out. That's the wrong way to look at it. They're literally stealing the oil. That's the thing, is that NATO, you have 14 NATO countries with the US in literally all over the planet. They're attacking Russian oil ships, which are usually headed to China. Most of Russian oil is exported to China, and most of it goes by sea. It's not by pipeline like most people think. And they have to go the long way around because the Arctic hasn't melted yet. So the Americans are literally boarding those ships and stealing the oil under so-called US sanctions, which literally have no meaning outside the US. And this is happening in the Arctic. It's happening in the Atlantic. They're striking slash pirating Russian ships in the Indian Ocean. They're doing it in the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Baltic Sea, you name it. It's absolutely extraordinary. This is what blew my mind. And all of this started ramping up right now, like just in the same period as Venezuela and Iran. And it's so obvious what's going on. So that oil that the Americans are stealing, you have to factor it in. And we literally don't know how much of it it has been lost at sea, how much of it has been stolen. But really, like, I'll come back, by the way, to how much they've destroyed in terms of Russian production. But that's one thing you have to take into account, is they're literally stealing that oil. And Trump has also mentioned stealing the oil from Iranian tankers, which are, some of them have been strategically placed, on water, not in Iran, for such a scenario. But the Americans, I'm assuming they're going to steal some of that as well. And of course, Venezuela's oil has been stolen. And you have to take into account that Chevron, as well, during this period, right? It's amazing how everything has happened in such a condensed period. They've gone and done deals with Syria, with Israel, with Greece, with Cyprus, not just for gas, but also for oil. And of course, Chevron is going to be going to take the lion's share of these deals. So that's another source of revenue for the Americans. So you have to factor in oil that doesn't belong to them, which is why I call them the pirate state, because it's not just about how much they output. But even with that taken into consideration, right now, I think they're shipping, 14 million barrels a day. And like I said, their exports to Europe and Asia have never been higher than right now. And that shows you that everything I laid out is not just, it wasn't just obvious and backed up by data, but it's literally come to fruition this quickly already. So the Americans also kill the competition and force you to buy from them. You literally have no choice. If Hormuz is blocked, if Russian insurance premiums have gone through the roof, the ships never get to the destination because they keep getting blown up or pirated. You're literally going to gravitate. You're naturally going to gravitate towards U.S. oil and gas, whether you like it or not. And that's how their model works. It's basically through violence, through the barrel of a gun. They want to keep the dollar not just stable, but create this beast called the PETRO-GAS dollar.
One other question on this strand, and then we'll move on, is also I'm of the understanding, spoke to a few energy experts, that the issue, and what's your thought? I think the answer is going to be similar, but what's your thoughts on this? That when you look at the energy of the United States of America, the oil, they've gone past the peak, and now they're going towards like the lesser amount. So if you look at the reserves, you basically go through, when you find it, you go to the peak amount and then you drop down. So the fact that they don't have that much reserves themselves, doesn't that cause a huge problem? Because if you're not producing it yourself, in the sense of you're not able to produce it over the long term, then you're solely going to rely on piracy. And so it ends up becoming a problem because you're always having to like be a highway robber. What's your thoughts on that?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like at some point, the Americans, whether they like it or not, they will run out of their own oil. Like, they could still be, as I said, the number one exporters of crude, of fuel, the number one producers of crude and refined products and gas. And that's all great. Like, but for how long, right? At some point, you're going to run out of those resources to exploit in the United States. And that's exactly where the piracy comes in, right? I highlighted the fact that they're trying to save the dollar as the real goal, which it of course is, because they want dominance as a hegemon. But it kind of goes without saying that they are obviously also helping to mitigate the depletion of their own resources by stealing other people's stuff. Like it's really piracy, in my opinion. It's completely state piracy. It's not just, you have to understand, it's also the violence that goes with it, right? Like even George W. Bush, who was like a mass murdering criminal, right? I wouldn't be able to imagine him, for example, assassinating, Khamenei, which is really saying something, because Bush is a criminal, like one of the worst. And what he did in Iraq, like with all of that taken into account, even that administration didn't do some of the things that Trump is doing in order to achieve these goals. So they've really crossed over into like irrational, madman levels of interacting with other states for these resources. And I'm pointing that out to kind of highlight exactly what you're saying, which is like that must kind of expose how fast they're depleting their own resources if they're willing to go to these lengths, right? I mean, kidnapping and assassinating two heads of state in the span of a few weeks, unheard of in history. It's really unheard of. And the fact that, everyone just kind of goes on like nothing happened. Like President Maduro is literally in a jail cell right now with his wife, right? Kidnapped with his wife in his home. This is not normal. And it was done for the oil. And like you said, it underscores and highlights that the US are probably they've gone over that peak now, and I'm sure they'll discover, you know, some wells here and there, and some fields in terms of gas. I'm sure, right? But that's not really the point. It's that in total they're definitely, you know, about to hit that peak or just gone over in our lifetimes without question. And you know, in the future, the wars won't even be about oil anymore. But for now, the Americans, you can expect them to keep behaving like this, where they're stealing other people's oil. And I mean, Russia, you know, Iran, Venezuela, it's obvious, but we should repeat that they have the largest reserves of natural gas, proven reserves in the world, right? That's Russia and Iran, respectively, number 1 and number 2. And it's not a coincidence that they were attacked in this fashion. The attacks on Russian refineries, we've never seen that in the entire Ukraine war. Like, that war has been going on for just over 4 years now. The US, NATO/Ukraine have never attacked Russian refineries or oil tankers at this scale and this deep in terms of geographical length ever in that entire war. It's very clear. And I literally counted them myself and made the charts. You can see how every single month it's just going up and up and up. It's a trend, it's a pattern, and it highlights that deficit you're talking about.
I've got some questions about the refineries, but just before I do, the term you coined is PETRO-GAS dollar. And so the LNG, the gas, is another important element of it. Now, I noticed that the Qatari LNG was taken out of commission. They lost 25% supply. And I believe that the recommissioned one has American ownership in there, as far as I understand. In addition to that, I believe that there's a refinery in the United States of America, which is a shared joint venture between Qatar and the US, where there is some kind of benefit. But that's, I mean, if you can elaborate, and you probably got more information on it.
Yeah. So look, the way that I choose to look at what happened in Ras Laffan, which is also the same gas field that is shared with Iran. They call it South Pass, but it's the same one. It's the same gas field. You can look at it in a number of different ways. You could say literally like Qatar declared its force majeure. It's a force of nature. It was war and it just happened, right? And that's definitely plausible. It's the most plausible, actually. But I chose to look at it in a slightly different way, because for me, we all accept that the Americans and Israelis have access to you know, vast amounts of intelligence, and they have the technology and all this stuff, right? And they were attacking Iran at that point. It had been 3 weeks. So this is March 18th, and they started the war on February 28th. And, you know, there are literally teams of people whose only job is to give the president and the generals strike packages and tell them we'll hit ABC. And it's very likely that in response, the enemy will do X, Y, Z. This is their only job. So the people making these decisions, there's no way that they couldn't have known that Iran was going to hit Ras Laffan in response. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. And the fact that Netanyahu went on television and tried to distance Trump from that strike is so shady to me, right? Because he's never done it with a hospital, for example, that Israel bombed using American munitions. Isn't that weird, right? He'd never do it for a hospital or in Gaza, but he did it for a gas field in Qatar. So, and remember, it's not the first time the Israelis have hit Qatar. So it's not like this is some kind of new thing for them. Yeah, they struck that precedent last year. So for me, I think it's very clear that they hit South Pass gas field on purpose, knowing full well, just logically, because Iran said they will strike back an eye for an eye, and also because of their intelligence, that Iran was going to hit Ras Laffan in response. And that took out, as you pointed out, what was it, like 20% of their LNG capacity for the next 3 to 5 years. So when you're doing that, when you're provoking that retaliation, and you know it's going to happen, then you know that it's going to close, it's going to knock out not just 20% of the world's LNG, but also 20 to 30% of China's LNG. So it's a very calculated move. You know, if I were Trump and someone did that behind my back, I would go ballistic. So they planned this, right? They absolutely planned this, because the disaster that it creates on energy markets is so big that you cannot accept logically that it wasn't planned. So by doing that, they automatically killed off the rest of Qatar's share in Europe, and this ironically brings us back to Nord Stream, which is another US attack on infrastructure, right? When we talk about Nord Stream, most people think that it's only Russia that lost its share of Europe's market, but Qatar actually lost half of their share too. So the point I'm trying to make is the United States and Norway, but especially the United States, they ate all of Russia's share in the European market after the Nord Stream bombings, and they killed half of Qatar's LNG share in Europe. So now with Ras Laffan out of the picture and those contracts cancelled already in the first week of the war, the United States are basically finishing that job. They're basically eating the rest of Qatar's share, because there is no way that Qatar can supply Europe. And they said as much, that this is over now, right? So the United States, whether by accident, even if you want to say it's a coincidence or not, they are absolutely benefiting from what happened at Ras Laffan, and they're going to take over Qatar's share. Qatar basically are completely out of the European market now. And after what happened in Nord Stream, I think the common sense approach is to think that this was also calculated. So, and they used Israel to, shift the blame and say, well, it wasn't us, right? So that's one thing. And you mentioned in Texas or in the US, there's a joint venture. Actually, Ras Laffan was already a joint venture. I think it was 55% Qatar Energy and 45% ExxonMobil. So it was a US Qatari thing.
Right.
And just 2 weeks ago, like end of April, those exact same companies, so Qatar Energy and ExxonMobil, celebrated their first shipment of LNG from Golden Pass in Texas. So, like, I laughed when I saw that news, because they're going to make back like 20 times whatever they lost in Qatar. Like even that 20% of lost LNG capacity, all the money they would have made from that. And those were cheap contracts. They were very good for the customers, right? Now, Qatar and ExxonMobil, Qatar Energy and ExxonMobil are going to make back wartime prices and profits from what they're exporting from Texas. And it just goes to prove that everything I've been saying about the Middle East, being killed off as the old energy corridor and the United States becoming the new energy corridor, it's literally happening in front of our eyes as we speak, to the point that Qatar's state company is moving and is investing assets in the United States. Like, think about how significant that is, that a Middle Eastern energy-rich country is investing in the US. That really shows you where the money is at. And they own 70% of that venture. Qatar owns 70% of that venture with ExxonMobil in Texas, which goes to show you how serious all of this is. And they like I said, they're going to make back whatever money they lost in this war. No question. They probably already did. We just don't know about it yet.
But if they own 70% of the venture, does that not benefit them more than the US?
Yeah, absolutely. That's my point. It's that they believe in or they understand so much that the US is the future of the world's energy corridor, that they're investing that much in the United States. That's my point.
Okay. And coming back to it, you mentioned about Ukraine hitting a number of Russian oil refineries. And we did see a lot of explosions throughout the world and random refineries. Now, I was saying when we get Richard in, we're going to ask him this question. But we've seen about 3 American refineries being hit. One was Texas, one was Louisiana, and I forgot what the third one was. So if this is an American espionage where they're destroying refineries in order to consolidate power, why would they have hit like 3 of their own refineries?
I don't know. I really honestly don't know if those refineries that were hit in the US. I did see at least one, like in the last month during the same period.
Yeah.
Have an accident. They said it was an accident. And to be completely fair, it's very common, right? It's not something that is out of the ordinary. The thing is, what I'm wondering, and again, I'm just to be clear, I'm speculating now. I'm just hypothesizing with you, like thinking out loud. I'm wondering if that wasn't maybe the Russians responding, without making it too public. That is one option. It's maybe even the most likely after the fact that it was maybe just an accident. But I wouldn't think the Americans did that at all. On the contrary, they would usually, if they were blowing up other people's refineries, it's going to be other people's refineries. So the whole point is to kill the competition like a mafia would do, and then drive up your own sales. You create a captive market where everyone has no choice but to buy from you and buy at wartime prices as well. So, but the US, I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot in a way in terms of reputation after Nord Stream, because now whenever something shady happens in the world, everyone is looking at them, and for good reason. So if they did anything, like I said, the primary targets, it's Venezuela, it's Russia, it's Iran, it's those regions. They're definitely not going to attack their own stuff. If anything, if it wasn't an accident, which is the most likely, I would say it's maybe a Russian operation, but I don't want to sound or start like sounding like some European bureaucrat who blames everything on Russia.
Yeah.
It's logical in terms of geopolitics that they would maybe respond that way, but it's not big enough of a response. And if I could just add as a side note, everyone talks about like how closing Hormuz punishes the Americans. We are so past that. Like that would have worked in the 1970s or in 2001. It's not going to work now. You have to go and close the Gulf of Mexico. These refineries that you're talking about in Texas and Louisiana, you need to shut those down or shut down the Panama Canal if you really want to de-dollarize the planet. It's not happening otherwise, because the Americans, the way they conduct war is they go to other people's soil. And, that has its own challenges because it's a foreign terrain. It's difficult to navigate. There's the language issue, etc. But it lets you survive losses in terms of wars. The US lost in Vietnam. They got humiliated in Afghanistan. They got humiliated in Iran right now. But they keep coming back because their industrial base is shielded between two oceans. And that's the exact same idea they're applying to their energy base. They don't want to depend on the Gulf, the Arab Gulf anymore, the Persian Gulf. They're done with that. They want all of the customers to come to America. They want the energy corridor to be in America. That's the idea behind all of this.
So a couple of more questions. First of all, in terms of Russia, that's another country that's benefited a lot. If you look at it financially, they're selling gas like unbelievable numbers. Them and the United States of America have probably benefited more than anyone else. And that's why, like, a friend of mine thinks this is like a mass collusion, which goes above states. How do you explain this Russian benefit? Like, they are selling gas like nothing. They're now making deals with China. They're making deals with I'm hearing they're having conversation with Japan and Korea, which are American partners. And this is the problem. If this is an American plan, a lot of their partners are moving towards China and Russia.
Well, that was more true after Ukraine, right? Because Russia were forced to pivot east. They got sanctioned. Nord Stream was blown up, like literally the physical link to Europe was severed. That was true then. And the real gain was not just in terms of, the war causing the price of oil and gas to go up and therefore giving them, higher profits, but that they were selling it in rubles and they were doing basically deals that were not in dollars. That was the real victory. But the United States are undoing all of that now. There's no collusion. Right now, Russia's refineries, I went and started digging through the OPEC reports, right? Like OPEC is based here in Vienna. I started digging through them. Russia missed their production quota last month. Sorry, I keep saying last month, even though we're in May. In March, right? They missed their production quota by 400,000 barrels. That's a lot. Like, it's something else if they would have announced the cut. They did not announce the cut. That was because of the US / NATO / Ukraine attacks on their refineries, right? It's literally crippling their output, and not to mention whatever they're losing at sea to the piracy from the Swedish Navy, the French Navy, the British Navy, the Royal Navy, the US Navy, that are literally boarding these ships and confiscating the cargo and pulling them aside. And again, so they're losing oil in terms of what's being shipped in transit and also at the source. So like literally just go and look at the OPEC reports. You will physically see that their output has been crippled by these strikes. So there's no collusion going on whatsoever. And, the only reason that we're not, or most people are not seeing this for what it is just because the Russians haven't responded. But, if someone attacked a US refinery with a drone, you would call that an act of war. These are acts of war, and they are not just happening frequently. They are happening more severely than at any point during the Ukraine war. That really says a lot, because the fact the Americans and NATO chose to start that now, when Hormuz is constricted and Venezuela's oil is out of the picture, it's not a mistake. It's on purpose, right? That's what it shows you. So I guarantee there is no sort of collusion going on. I know, like, what you're referring to in general, and that definitely exists, where you have business interests, especially corporations, who they don't see borders, right? Like they just see dollar signs and money. That definitely happens, but this is not one of those cases. This is really something that transcends even that, and it's really geopolitical at its core. The United States are literally just killing off the competition, controlling whatever is left, and forcing everyone to buy American. That's what's going on, and it's working. You can also see how that's working through the number of sales, right, which are at their highest.
So you mentioned 400,000 barrels. Is that per day or per month?
Yeah, no, that's that is literally barrels per day. So you know,
day.
Russia
Okay.
before they've cut their production during you know, agreements that they made with Saudi Arabia. This was during Ukraine. I mean, we are still during Ukraine, but like towards
Yeah.
the first half of the war, they made agreements with OPEC, right, in Vienna to limit their output to drive up the prices, and it certainly operated like a cartel. But this is not something that was agreed upon, and it really shows you how damaging it is. And I think last month, April, was the most violent of all of them in terms of strikes. I think it's 24 strikes. I made the chart myself, so I just don't have it in front of me. But yeah, I think it was 24 strikes. And I in the chart, I put three categories. So you've got the ships themselves being pirated, you know, by whatever navy from these NATO countries. And like, for example, Sweden took one just this week, right, which doesn't go reported. So it's the ships being pirated and or struck. Some of them just get blown up. Like there was an LNG ship from Russia that was blown up in the Mediterranean. It's been floating around for a month, and no one wants to clear it. And it's also in terms of the refineries struck and any export hubs, right? The Russians send their oil, this Urals blend, to China through the Western ports, and that is very close to NATO, obviously, and they can't really help it because the pipelines are at full capacity. So you know, you can't do anything about that because they're already at 100%. That's you know, you basically got Power of Siberia 1 and 2. 2 isn't done yet. Those are for gas, and for oil you've got ESPO. So those are already at 100%. You can't give China any more by land. So they have to ship everything via the Baltic ports, and those are taking the heaviest hits. But just this week, I think there's a gas facility 1,500 kilometers from the front that was struck. And you know, if you expect me to believe that Ukraine can do that by themselves, or they can strike a Russian tanker in the Arctic, I'm just not buying it. This is a US NATO campaign without any question.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Now, I guess another element of this, Richard, is because I guess your overarching thesis is this is a U.S. operation in order to create the PETRO-GAS dollar to benefit the United States of America. But if you look at today, the bond market is above 5% on the, I think it's the 30-year yield. The entire financial market is struggling. You're seeing America sell off bonds more than, since December, they've been selling off a huge amount of bonds. The fact that, and this is, many economists are saying this is going to cause hyperinflation. Why would they do something which is essentially destroying their own economy, destroying their entire financial capability, and possibly taking the world into depression?
Well, I disagree with that, and I provided the data and the investigation. I went and looked at the Treasury reports myself.
Okay.
Around December, you had, in January, it's the same thing. The money was leaving the US. That's the point. In January, it's like minus 25 billion deficit, right, of capital leaving the US. And then in 1 month, right, like as soon as this war starts and the US start, beating the war drums that they're going to attack Iran, suddenly a $200 billion switch. So it goes from, you know, a deficit of minus 25 billion to 180 billion. And half of that capital is going towards bonds. So half of it is for energy and half of it going towards bonds. And the fact that it's going towards treasuries shows you how much faith some people, or basically the richest people who have this money to spend and put around, how much faith they have in the US dollar, even during this period, right? Which says a lot. And 90% of that money was coming from private foreign investors. It wasn't coming from foreign central banks or foreign governments. And I think it's really, really important to point out, because I also exactly had this question. I was thinking, like, how can we, see whether the overarching goal of sustaining the dollar, keeping it this hegemon is actually working. And this is another indicator in addition to the oil sales, because the oil sales, you could say, is temporary. It's just something happening now in a spike because people want to make up for the shortage. But you're not going to go and buy tens of billions of dollars worth of treasuries, which and secure and lock your money into the US dollar like that if you have no faith in it in the long term. So I think those people, this class of people, the stinking rich ones, they have a very clear understanding of which direction the wind is blowing and are acting accordingly. And that trend is continuing, right? But I put all of that in the investigation. I explicitly put the links to the Treasury, and you can also see, like I said, the sales data from the EIA, that half of that money is going to energy sales and half to the Treasury. So I was very, very, very thorough with this before, saying anything. I wanted to make sure that it's airtight. And literally every map, every chart, every graphic in that investigation I made myself as well, exactly to that end.
And so overarchingly, you said you want to mention how long this plan has been enacted for. How long have they been constituting this plan?
Yeah. So, when we talk about the US invading for oil, I think we all think of Iraq and George W. Bush, right? And even back then, like, there was no internet the way there is now, but everyone knew. I at least remember that it was sort of common knowledge. It was sort of common knowledge that this is about oil. And that administration, you have to think who was in that administration. You've got George Bush, his family. They come from Texas oil business, from precisely this Gulf of Mexico, right? They made their wealth and their money and their fortune through the Texas oil industry. And then you look at Condoleezza Rice. She was on the board of Chevron, Chevron, who are gobbling up all of this real estate now and resources. She was on their board for 10 years. And I'd actually forgotten that they named a tanker after her, right? The SS Condoleezza Rice. She was the national security advisor and then the Secretary of State, like the top US diplomat. And she comes from Chevron. I think that really says a lot. And in addition, you have Dick Cheney, the vice president, who is not just a raving neocon, but he came from Halliburton. Halliburton profited immensely from the war in Iraq, not just through all the various deals they had as a contractor, but especially with oil, right? So that whole administration, like literally the people with the top positions, came from the oil business. That's where their families came from and where they came from. So when you look at the national energy policy, and I quoted from it in the investigation, they make it very clear, like so many times throughout this document. And again, this was not written just by Dick Cheney, the vice president. It was written with all of the top executives of America's oil and energy companies, which is a scandal. And that they are literally writing the national energy policy for America. And that's why the White House fought to the Supreme Court to try and keep that secret until 2007. For 6 years, they were fighting to keep those meetings secret. So, they make it very clear throughout this whole document that the Western Hemisphere, this comes up so many times, I thought I was listening to Trump. They make it so clear that the production and the center of gravity has to be the Western Hemisphere. And that explains, Trump, when he talks about the Don Roe Doctrine, people are thinking of the Monroe Doctrine because he's playing on the name. But he's really implementing the policies or the objectives that were outlined in this document in 2001 in the National Energy Policy. And that was written by big oil and gas. So it centers around making the Western Hemisphere, number one in terms of the world's energy corridor. And it talks about Venezuela's oil multiple times. And they treat the idea of importing oil from other countries, the language that they use, it's almost like they view it as a national security threat. And, if you want to be like very, very geostrategic, you could sort of make that argument. But, the United States, the only conclusion that is left when you treat oil imports, literally just oil imports, as a national security threat is you have to murder the people and take their oil, or, simply up your own production. Well, the Americans are basically doing both. So, they want to be energy sufficient, and not just energy sufficient, but they want to be dominant in terms of the market. They want to make the market come to them. That's exactly what's going on. It's an extraordinary document in terms of graphics as well, very, very detailed. I recommend anyone who has time to go read the National Energy Policy of 2001. It will make so much sense about what's happening now. Trump, he's just the face of this, right? Like, it's not his plan, all of this stuff that we talked about. I don't think he's particularly intelligent or capable of thinking of this. And even if he were, it's not something he could implement by himself. This took a long time to do. When the Americans invaded Iraq, they were not oil sufficient back then, in 2003. They were literally invading it so they could have enough oil. That it was very, very clear what the objective was. But now when we talk about the United States in 2026, it's a very, very different picture, right? They have tasted the profits of the Ukraine war in Europe and what it means to kill the competition and create a captive market. So they're basically taking the model they just used on Ukraine with gas and Europe and scaling that up globally with both oil and gas. It has taken them decades to build up their own capacity, because if they had created a shortage like with closing Hormuz, they themselves would not have enough oil. So they needed to steal the oil from Iraq, from Venezuela. They needed to build up their own production, become number one in oil and gas production, and then they could basically, move on to this phase of the plan, which is extorting the planet.
Very interesting perspective, Richard. And I guess based on your position, they need to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed for a lot more longer, right, in order to keep control.
That's not opening. That's not opening. You look at Venezuela. The Americans are still outside Venezuela. Like, people think that they just came and kidnapped Maduro and left. No. There is literally a blockade outside of Venezuela to this day. And that is exactly how they control the oil. They're not physically in the oil fields. They basically check which tanker is trying to leave. If it's Chevron, it can pass. And if it's not Chevron, if it's not a US tanker, you can't pass. That's how they're doing it. So, when I realized that, and when I realized what they're doing in the Arctic with Operation Arctic Sentry, and by the way, this is not just, you look at the NATO security brief and the UK security brief, both of them were published in February, March. You can see so clearly how this is a piece of the puzzle, because they mentioned, for example, the GI-UK gap. This is a corridor between the UK, Iceland, and Greenland. That's the name, GI-UK. And that's the other blockade. It's the second blockade in this puzzle. And it's why the Americans shifted their so-called narcotics operation all the way up there exactly to this location and pirated a Russian tanker. So when I put these pieces together, I was like, Jesus, it's so obvious what's going on. They want to control, they're using their Navy to control the oil coming in and out of Venezuela. And then they're doing the exact same thing all the way in the North Atlantic, in the Arctic, with the GI-UK gap, and they're using NATO to help them. So, I predicted the blockade on Iran would come next because of these two things that just happened. And I was correct. And 2 days after I released the documentary, Trump announced the blockade. So, they're not leaving. They're definitely not leaving. The only scenario I can imagine where they would actually leave is maybe if they toppled the government in Iran and installed a puppet, and like the Shah, which used to be a US puppet, and they secure the oil that way. But in terms of a blockade, they're not leaving. And we should think of it as them being in the Indian Ocean. When they struck that Iranian ship, the Iristina, they did that 3,200 kilometers away near Sri Lanka. And that's exactly why I put when I made the map of all the three blockades, I used Sri Lanka as the reference to show how wide and sweeping this blockade is. It's not in Hormuz, it's in the Indian Ocean. And people should really keep that in mind. And I guarantee you they're not leaving. This is going to become a permanent thing. And that's why in the investigation, I included the fact that the US are transitioning to a naval power. They will still be an aerial power, but their Navy right now is so important. They're investing unbelievable trillions into their Navy. And Trump signed and released the Maritime Action Plan in February, right as the war in Iran began and the blockade in the Arctic against Russian oil. And, they are going to mandate that anyone who buys or trades American oil and LNG or any cargo with the US has to buy a US-made ship. So it shows you that the Americans are switching their military and their economy to maritime-based power. And they are so confident that, in their position, that they're looking decades ahead. They're thinking, if we force everyone to buy American-made ships, we'll build up our naval industry and also generate further profits. So it's so obvious what's going on and what direction they're headed. Like, I've been doing this for a minute, and to me, U.S. foreign policy has never been clearer than now. It's becoming a naval power, piracy, and they're going to take resources by force like never before in order to make America, number one in terms of oil and gas sales and force you to buy their stuff.
Great analysis, Richard. Richard, you mentioned a documentary that you made and some analysis you've done. Where can people find your documentary?
Yeah, so if you go on youtube.com/Richard Medhust, you'll find the documentary there, or you can type on the YouTube search. It's Birth of the PETRO-GAS Dollar and the Pirate State. And you can also find the written version of that investigation, which has even more data, like from the Treasury and the custom maps I made. That's on Substack. So richardmedhust.substack.com.
Brilliant. Well, when we put this video out as an individual video, I'll link all of that in. Richard, everyone should be following YouTube. Everyone should be following Substack. Really different perspective, and appreciate you taking your time out to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you as
for having me,
always.
really.
Thank you. Guys, that was
Thank you.
Richard Medhust. What a smart individual. What a great guy. Great information. Great knowledge. Give his channel a follow. Go and watch his documentary. Go and read his Substack. I'm gonna read it for sure. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Guys, what do you think? He doesn't think this is because of Zionism. He doesn't think it's because of, for example, Simon's position, which is the FIC. He thinks this is an American plan in order to take control over the PETRO-GAS dollar. Thoughts on his views? I can see some people in the chat disagree. Why do you disagree? Let me know in the main section in the comments. I am going to go back and read it. Let me know your thoughts and like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe. Okay. We now have... We've got Anthony Aguilar coming on. So let me quickly switch to the other program. Brilliant. One second, guys. Just gonna... Okay. Okay, so next we've got Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar on. Always appreciate him coming on. So let me just quickly get him up. Hi, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Marvelous. Let me start this. I just want to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar onto the show. He is a Green Beret. He has served the country for a number of decades, and his military analysis, specifically his technical analysis, is untouchable compared to anybody else. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you for having me. It's another day of busy occurrences globally, so glad to be on.
For sure. Appreciate you coming on. So immediately getting to the news, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, went to China. He made a number of claims about what had occurred in that meeting. He said that China agreed that the strait should be closed. He agreed that Iran shouldn't have control over the Strait of Hormuz, and there should be no toll charged, and there should be no nuclear weapon. This was a statement he put out. But then later, when people asked, this was a White House statement, but later when the reporters asked him about the specifics, he seemed to suggest that he'd mentioned these things, but he'd got no response from President Xi. What's your thoughts on the entirety of what happened there?
Well, the reality of which Donald Trump lives in is often fantasy or a making of his own desire, not necessarily reality. I do believe that in the meeting with Xi Jinping at the high-level talks, where it's typically principal with some few select staff, that the Trump administration did offer these things that they want China to help with. We know that based on what we heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the trip over to China on Air Force One, he clearly said the United States is going to be asking for A, B, and C, which were all three of those things. So do I think that Trump asked for those? I do. Do I think that China is going to entertain it? No. I don't think that China is willing to set a precedent in the world where the United States can indiscriminately bomb and strike another nation based on a feeling or an assumption. That obviously puts China in a pretty bad situation globally. And I think that China is using this opportunity with their leverage to draw a very clear line in supporting Iran. And, I think that for China, it benefits China, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but certainly in the big picture in the long run, that if Iran did control the Strait of Hormuz and did levy tolls, because we know that China and Iran are operating politically, diplomatically in favor. So China stands to gain from that relationship. And what I think is that Xi Jinping sent a very red line and said, if the Trump administration escalates or goes into further hostilities or allows Israel to escalate, that would be a red line for China. And I think that Donald Trump's response to that was, okay, we won't escalate, but we need you to support us on these things. And I don't think that China is going to do that. I think that Donald Trump returns from China in a weaker position than he did when going over. And I think that he has a pretty tough decision to make in the next coming days of whether or not to escalate or to step away with some kind of negotiation that won't necessarily be in favor of the United States.
Well, he did say there's a couple of things, and to agree with you, I mean, we had a report today that Nvidia said, basically China said no to Nvidia and said that they'll be producing their own chips, and so that was huge. And you saw, I'm not sure if that was the reason, but you saw a major correction in the stock market today. Now, one of the things he said in his statement was, he said war with Iran, and then he said to be continued. That seems to suggest that he's planning to go back and continue the war. What's your thoughts?
I think he certainly intends to continue the blockade. And I think that with the continuation of the blockade, there will be friction, fog, and conflict and hostilities in the struggle, if you will, to get control of the strait. I think that Donald Trump is now weighing, is weighing the threshold, weighing the risk, and knowing that, okay, if I go all in, if I go, total war in terms of the blockade, potentially blocking land routes, going into a ground attack or a ground assault, that it could be a red line. So I think that Trump is looking at, okay, what can I do? We have the blockade that is growing in disfavor around the world, and it's also very expensive. So how can I get control of the strait to where I can come to a negotiation? Or how can I get my hands on even a little bit of depleted uranium to say, look, we took away their nuclear capability? Because if Trump leaves empty-handed, that is a disaster for him, also more so than it is already a disaster politically here on the home front, but also diplomatically in the world in terms of American strength. So I think what we're going to see is, when he says to be continued, will the blockade continue? Yes. Will the U.S. Navy make additional attempts for specific penetrating operations into the strait to potentially gain control of the strait, at least within the 12 nautical mile trafficable channel? I think that we're going to see that. I think that we may even see another attempt for a very high risk, highly specific surgical special forces operation raid to include Delta, Navy SEALs, Rangers, to potentially seize even the smallest amount of depleted uranium to show, look, America, we defeated their Navy, we defeated their Air Force, we depleted their missile capability, even though we know that's not true. And we took away their ability to ever pursue a nuclear weapon, even though that was already the state of affairs. And the Strait of Hormuz, hey, not our problem. China and Europe can deal with it. I think that would be good enough for Donald Trump in the American public to at least walk away. So I think that in the coming days and weeks, we're going to see the planning and the maneuver to conduct continued naval operations closer to the strait, and potentially some type of strategic raid or surgical strike to gain control.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think we're all expecting some kind of escalation. Now, some more breaking news we got was that the American administration had extended the ceasefire in Lebanon by 45 days. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't even know what that means, how they even calling it a ceasefire, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it means nothing. There is not a ceasefire in Lebanon. I think that it's laughable to continue to say that, just as much as we say that the Gaza ceasefire is now fragile. There was never a ceasefire. There is not a ceasefire in southern Lebanon or in Lebanon south of the Litani. There is no ceasefire. So To say that is simply window dressing. It's platitude. It means nothing. I think it's in a way to try to appease the global audience in saying, oh, look, there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. We're trying to come to a peace agreement with Iran. We're trying to end this. Iran is the ones that are not. Well, Iran are the ones that are being pragmatic and realistic, and they're looking at that and saying, no, we're not going to capitulate to some type of peace deal when you're claiming that there's a ceasefire in Lebanon and there's not. We want a real ceasefire. We want an end of hostilities. We want the Israeli occupation forces to leave southern Lebanon and to leave Gaza. We want a peace deal in both. And the peace deal with Iran is intrinsically connected to the peace deal there. And so I think that Donald Trump is trying to dilute what's happening in Lebanon, but the world, we can see it. We see it every day. If there's a ceasefire, why does the Israeli occupation forces continue to push further into Lebanon, and why does Hezbollah continue to give them a pretty good licking on the battlefield? There's not a ceasefire.
And we also got a report today by a journalist saying that the position of America, Israel, and the Lebanese government is this, that they want Israel and the Lebanese government to basically confront Hezbollah. What or how will such a confrontation look? I mean, what will happen? Will it result in civil war? Will it result in basically the entire taking of Lebanon by Hezbollah?
Well, it certainly could change the dynamic or tip the scales one way or another, because the truth is that Hezbollah has demonstrated that they are capable, that they are not obliterated, as Donald Trump and Netanyahu have claimed in the past. They are effective, and they are the ones doing something against continued Israeli incursion into Lebanon. And I think the majority now of the citizens of Lebanon, the Lebanese people, realize that Israel is not stopping. This is not a matter of a security buffer or just against Hezbollah. We know that Israel is now conducting strikes north of the Litani River. I think most of the Lebanese are waking up to the fact that that Hezbollah is our only defense. They are the only ones taking a stand to do something against Israel, continuing to just move further and further and further into Lebanon until they potentially have it all. We know that based on the Pax Judaica. We know that based on the Greater Israel Plan, that it doesn't stop. And I think most Lebanese are waking up to that the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government aren't doing anything about it. So if anybody comes in on the side to try to stop or defeat Hezbollah, there could absolutely be a civil war. And I think that Hezbollah would be quite successful.
Senator Mike Johnson just said that Operation Epic Fury is concluded, and now the next operation is to open the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, what does that mean? And what I mean by that is, we know they failed on Project Freedom. We know that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. We know there is an American blockade that is further ashore. So when they say they're going to open the Strait of Hormuz, what does that actually mean?
It's a lot of hyperbole. I think that if we looked at, Operation Epic Fury ending, Donald Trump ended it on the 62nd day, technically the 60th, because within the first 48 hours of hostility, the president kind of has a window before he has to announce anything. So 60 days was really at the 62-day mark of actual hostility since February 28th. And he sent a letter to the Senate that said, or to Congress, to the House and the Senate, that said, hey, Operation Epic Fury is over, right on the 62nd day. So he didn't have to ask for an extension, and he didn't have to ask for a continued war powers resolution vote. And then he invoked Project Freedom. That lasted about 28 hours. It was quickly shut down because we know that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and other Gulf nations in the Persian Gulf, specifically close to Iran, were saying, hey, you're not going to execute or support Project Freedom from our bases. And so that quickly came to an end. So why now with Operation Sledgehammer is this new operation that's beginning, specifically now focused on the Strait of Hormuz? And a reminder to everyone is that the opening of the Strait of Hormuz was never an issue before this war. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz was never one of the reasons that we said that we were going to go and start this war, because the Strait of Hormuz was not closed nor controlled. So this is a problem, a generated self error. This is an unforced error on behalf of the administration. And how do you then open up the strait? Well, we do know that I still think that Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and even the UAE, even when they're drawing closer to relations with Israel, will be very hesitant to want to openly support military operations. We now know through leaked information or for information that has now been made public that Saudi Arabia had been operating militarily, that the UAE had been operating militarily, so that they have now put a target on their back as combatant belligerents in this conflict. So I think they will try to distance themselves from Operation Sledgehammer. So here's how the United States does it. We know that during Operation, or excuse me, Project Freedom, that the United States sailed the USS Canberra, the USS Murphy through the strait in a very surreptitious manner, got it into the south, so where now the guided missile cruisers and the destroyers are south of the strait in the Gulf of Oman and in the Arabian Sea and further south in the Indian Ocean near Diego Garcia. So what I think we're going to see is a lot more patrolling or attempts to interdict the Mosquito fleet or Iranian maritime assets to try to open up passage. But we also know that Iran, and again, I don't know if I can't confirm this, but I can say that I think it's intentional. Here's exactly what I thought, and I think in a previous discussion you and I had perhaps last week, I had mentioned this, that I think that if I were Iran, what I would do is I would release all of those vessels, or a large number of them in a controlled manner at my accord, through the strait, because the United States has set up a distant blockade of my blockade. So if I open my blockade and I allow all these ships to go through, and the U.S. is now the one turning them around, now the U.S. takes the blame for closing the strait or the strait being closed. It's a brilliant move on behalf of Iran. And I think as we saw that there were vessels that came through the strait yesterday and early this morning, that's exactly what they're doing. Because they have that internal control, that internal line of transport, they can open it and close it at will. And the valve to then let vessels through the outer blockade is the United States. Iran has nothing to do with that. So I think if I were in the Iranian general staff and wearing my Iranian planner's hat, I would advise my leadership. Well, let's go ahead and open it, allow vessels to go through the Strait of Hormuz in mass, to where it becomes uncontrollable for the United States to stop them all. And then the United States has to decide, are they going to try to stop them all? Because then that makes them look really bad, or are they just going to drop their outer blockade and we let the things go through, and then we, Iran, can control what goes in and out when it goes in and out. So I think that's what Iran is doing, and quite frankly, from a strategic perspective, it's quite brilliant.
Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, and I do think that, and I think some of that was an agreement, and I do think that some of that was an agreement with China as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, we have got some more information. You mentioned Dubai, you mentioned the UAE. There's been a lot of back and forth with them. We know UAE was basically moving more towards Israel. But recently, a report came out that Netanyahu had taken a secret visit to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, to the UAE during the war. The UAE denied it. Then we got confirmation from OSINT accounts that demonstrate that there was a flight that went to the UAE. And not only was it not Netanyahu, it was Netanyahu, top government ministers, the head of the IDF, the head of the army, and various others who went to the UAE. And now some are reporting that the reason Israel released this is possibly to isolate the UAE, to bring them more closer to Israel. What do you think is going on with this dynamic? Why is it like Israel came out with this information? Why did the UAE deny it? What's your kind of thoughts on what happened there?
Israel's announcement of that is precisely why Israel has done it. I think that Israel planned this trip to visit the UAE, and the UAE conditions for that trip were like, okay, you're going to come and talk to us about how you can support us defensively, and how we, now that we're out of OPEC, who can we start to work with? And I think the UAE probably had a condition for that visit of, hey, don't tell anybody, keep it a secret. Let's keep this on the down low. And Israel said, okay, yeah, sure. Made their visit, and then hey, we went and visited the UAE. Look, it is precisely the reason to isolate the UAE in the region, so that the UAE then has no choice but to move closer to and with Israel. It's a very parasitic relationship that Israel is developing here, where the host and the parasite are one and the same in a way, compelling the UAE into this parasitic relationship based on manipulation, based on compelling, based on isolation. It's a very toxic relationship that Israel is pulling the UAE into. And unfortunately, the UAE doesn't have a lot of options right now unless they overtly and deliberately denounce that and kind of, I say, come back to the other side. But if they sit on the fence like they are, they've kind of already made their bed, and Israel is taking advantage of that. This is absolutely manipulation, and Israel's attempts to isolate UAE to bring them into Israel's controlled orbit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the UAE. I think they're really desperate to be within Israel's orbit. In terms of bringing this back to what we were talking about previously, I spoke to Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson a couple of days ago, and he said that he believed if you look at the assets that are there at the moment, the aircraft carriers, the different aircrafts, various things, he said that there's only enough firepower, he believes, to conduct an operation for 11 days. And then after that, they'll be struggling again. What's your thoughts? Because it seems like the buildup is a lot more bigger than it was on February the 28th. It did last 39 days. What's your thoughts on the buildup in the Middle East?
Well, so the buildup is greater, and here's the paradox with military forces, in that the more forces you have, the more logistics that are required, the longer it takes, the more there is a drain. And when you look at how much forces we have in the region now, every day that this distant blockade goes on, and every day there is not a negotiation, and every day that the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marines, and the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Special Operations have to stand ready at a high level of readiness, every day that is degrading in logistics, in preparation, in readiness, in posture. Every day that goes on, we know for a fact that China is providing Iran with exquisite signal intelligence and other types of intelligence on U.S. positions, U.S. posture that I'm sure Iran is studying. So every day that goes by that the United States is sitting in this distant blockade and deciding what to do, Iran is gaining more and more of an advantage, building more Shahed drones, stockpiling more missiles, figuring out how the United States is maneuvering and what is going where and who is doing what. So when you look at it from that perspective, the longer this drags on, and though the U.S. may have force buildup, that comes at a cost. And in this situation, not a cost that is beneficial over time. Now, in terms of how many days could the United States last, so to speak, I think that calculus changes day by day. If you were to snap the chalk line, so to speak, and say, okay, as of today, if hostilities were to resume, how long could the U.S. last, so to speak? I think that I would agree with Colonel Wilkerson. I'd say probably about 11 days, maybe 2 weeks, depending. But every day that this goes on, and Iran learns more to paint the picture, to create a common operating picture or a COP, and also increase their drone capability, that calculus could very much change. If Iran can overwhelm an aircraft carrier, so to speak, let's say that Iran decides in their critical factor analysis, in their planning, which I'm sure that they do because they have a joint staff, that they look at, okay, what do we strike? And if I were Iran, I would look at this from the perspective of, if we were to put assets or increase our threat towards an aircraft carrier, the United States would then have to bring in more defensive from their destroyers and their cruisers to protect that aircraft carrier. They would have to expend a lot of their precision munitions to try to shoot down a drone swarm or drones. So let's go ahead and load up about 500 one-way Shahed drones and send them in 3 or 4 waves and have the U.S. military expend exquisite munitions, that stockpile that could deplete exponentially. So that 11 days could go down to 5. That 5 days could go down to 3, depending on what the U.S. does or does not do. That could be 11 days. But what I do know for sure is that every day that goes by, Iran is gaining incrementally the upper hand, militarily and diplomatically.
And I guess that's the biggest problem because, as you said, they are gaining diplomatically, they're gaining politically as well as militarily. The issue is that if the US was to conduct an 11-day war, at what point do they get to a situation where, they do an 11-day war, they do a 14-day war? After that, they're going to be stuck, right? They'll have hit, let's assume they didn't hit Iran's infrastructure, because we know if they hit Iran's infrastructure, meaning their power plants, then Iran will do the same to the Gulf states. But once Iran or US, let's say, does that, they're going to be in a worse situation. They're not going to be able to come to a deal with Trump. So why do you get my point on this? So where would that place Trump?
So I think that here's the critical factor of the operational analysis that I know is happening on the U.S. side, maybe not in Donald Trump's mind, but certainly in military planners like the CENTCOM commander, and what's happening in the mind of the Iranian military. And that's the equation, or the balance of, the balanced equation like you would do in chemistry, between culmination and termination. The United States knows that the United States planners know we have this much munitions and we have this much capability for these many days. If we were to initiate hostilities or a shooting war again, do we have the capability to meet culmination, or to meet our goal, whatever that may be, to open the strait, to do something within that time? And if culmination occurs before termination, meaning you run out of Schlitz, you run out of the ability before you've reached your end, well, then that is the definition of failure. And from Iran's side, they're looking at it, okay, if we know that the United States has this much capability for this amount of time, let's give it a buffer, benefit of the doubt for a little bit longer, so we're prepared, so we don't culminate before we terminate. What then do we want to prevent, and what do we have enough to do? And that's the balancing of that equation, termination versus culmination. And right now, the United States is in a very precarious, thin line of making that decision. And if we go into this again, can we actually meet objectives before we are unable to continue, like what happened with Operation Epic Fury? Operation Epic Fury did not achieve its stated operational goals. Therefore, we culminated in capability before we terminated in mission objective. So if we do that again, we're really going to be in a very bad place, to where the administration is going to have even less options. I think right now, the options on the president's table, provided by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs through U.S. Central Command and U.S. Special Operations Command, through various options, are limited, and the president has to make a decision. And I think with those decisions that come in the next few days or week, it's either going to be all in or not. And this is what I think the objectives on the table are. How do we open the strait to give the appearance, to give the perception that the United States is controlling it? If vessels are going through, then technically it's not closed. We understand that now it's not closed, it's simply controlled. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of the United States, how do we conduct a limited operation to give the perception that we are in control? Whether it's 12 hours or 24 hours, to take control of the navigable 12 nautical mile passage transit way through the strait and say, we're in control. Oh, look, we opened the strait, we did it. And some type of operation. I do think that the whole the nuclear weapon thing, again, when the administration went in on the we're going to war because of the nuclear weapon piece, well, now you got to put your money where your mouth is. You got to show something. You got to show that you did something, because Operation Midnight Hammer in June apparently obliterated it, but it didn't. So that's now on the table, and America's asking, so did we obliterate it or not? And now we're going to leave with nothing to show for it? So I think the two things on the table for Donald Trump to try to figure out, to culminate, to terminate the objective before we run out of capability, is something to show that the never existing weapons capability is now re-obliterated, and that the United States has demonstrated the ability to control the strait for even a small period of time. And with those conditions, I think Donald Trump would be comfortable, or at least willing, to walk away. But I don't think the U.S. is going to be able to achieve that.
And that's the biggest problem, right? Because if you look at what Trump had to say just now, I believe it was yesterday, he said, I saw the Iranian proposal, and soon as it didn't mention nuclear enrichment, I tore it up. He also said a second thing, which is that he wants 20 years when Iran isn't able to enrich nuclear enrichment. When the sides are so far apart, what's the chances of a deal?
Well, you know, the truth of this is that this is the nuclear discussion has now become the paradoxical pill. It is a paradox. It is one of those things to where, if we said they had a nuclear program. We said we destroyed it. Then we said that the reason we went into this war is for the nuclear program. The nuclear program in terms of weaponization never existed. So how do you prove how do you prove a false positive? How do you prove something that isn't, or prove something, or prove that you stopped something that didn't exist? Because what would have been the easy way out is for Donald Trump to say, yeah, we obliterated it, not concerned about it. But he's doubled down on that. So now you have to have something to show for it. However, in the eyes of the rest of the world now, maybe the rest of the world, maybe not necessarily Israel, but the majority of the world is that, well, hey, United States, what you've now demonstrated to Iran and to all of us is that if we don't have a nuclear weapon, you're going to come after us. Because you didn't go after Russia, and you didn't go after China, you didn't have to go over North Korea, you went after Iran. And they don't have a nuclear weapon. So what you're showing the world is that if you don't have one, you're on the defensive and you're on the weak side. So maybe they should. But then let's take the weaponization off the table and say, why wouldn't Iran, a very large country with a very large population, why wouldn't Iran want to pursue civil nuclear capability like power plants, electricity generation, nuclear energy? Every other country in the world practically does it. We do it. In fact, the aircraft carriers that are sitting off of the coast of Iran in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea are nuclear powered. So nuclear power, why would you want to restrict Iran from doing that? So it's basically a paradox to saying you can't have any of this. Well, what you're telling me I can't have didn't exist in the first place, so I can't show you that I don't have it. And the reasons that I do want to have this is for something that isn't that. So you're going to say that I can't have any of it, and then that becomes unrealistic. So the administration right now, in their constant pushback of like, nope, hate it, horrible proposal, tear it up, don't like it, it's not a good negotiating position for a man that calls himself the master negotiator in the art of the deal. He sure is not understanding at sometimes. Like the old song goes, you got to know when to fold them. And Trump's not learning that lesson.
That's very accurate in terms of what you're saying. He's definitely not learning the lesson. And I think the biggest problem we have is the way we're kind of going towards an escalation where there's no point of return. Because in reality, as you mentioned, he can't make a deal with the nuclear because he's so far apart from Iran. Iran can't give away its sovereign right of the nuclear. The Strait of Hormuz, Iran wants control over it. Trump can't allow them to have control over it because psychologically it's just a demonstration of the major loss, because the Strait was open on February the 27th. Now the Strait is completely in Iran's under Iran's control. But more than that, the Gulf states become weakened. They won't allow Iran to have complete control of the Strait as well. And so it brings so much complexity that I don't see how a deal can be made. And I think that's why we're all thinking, all of us, that this is going to get back to becoming kinetic. But then the question mark becomes, if it goes back to being kinetic, as you mentioned, as many others have mentioned, there's only enough firepower to go for like 14 days. And if there is, then after that, there has to be another escalation. Will that be? Will that be a limited ground incursion? Will it be later a ground invasion? Will it be a nuclear bomb? And so I think these are a lot of the major questions. But right now, the Strait is closed. The strait is closed. Trump is benefiting. How much more longer can he keep the strait closed? And what I mean by that is we saw today the bond market is completely above 5% now. The yield is above. I believe there's a large sell-off of bonds. How much more longer can the United States of America keep the strait closed?
Well, what I think should concern every American is that last week Donald Trump said that he doesn't care about the financial situation of Americans. So, is the burden upon America and Americans necessarily in Donald Trump's calculus? No, and that's not me assuming that. He said that. Those are his words. So, what then is in his calculus? Well, I think it's the ability for the oligarchs and his supporters to maintain their wealth and or increase their wealth. We know that the market has been, I mean, volatile is not even the word to describe it anymore. I would say that the market has just become erratic. And that when you, what then is the condition for Donald Trump to then say, okay, we need to do something? It's certainly not the benefit of the American people. So where I think that we're going to see, and the point you made is an excellent point in that, okay, so we go back to hostilities for 14 days. We then say, okay, let's do negotiations again. We start negotiations again, and we start over in the exact same place with the exact same deal where Iran says, well, our conditions haven't changed. And then we go into another, ceasefire and then back into hostilities again. Is this how things are going to go? I'll tell you, from my experience, for the American people, in terms of your tax dollar and in terms of the volatility and the irrationality of the market, and in terms of gas prices continuing to creep up little by little every month, the expenses of everything getting more expensive week by week, buckle up, because that's what we're in now. And if anybody tells me that, oh, it couldn't last that long, well, I'll tell you, I've had boots on the ground in Iraq from the invasion until most recently, and we're still there. And they said it then. Oh, this is going to be over soon. No. Afghanistan, this will be over soon. No. Syria, this will be quick, limited and quick. No. Vietnam, this will be quick. We know what we're doing. We got a way out. No. So is it possible that this new reality of escalate, negotiate, escalate, negotiate, escalate, negotiate could continue for several more months to a year? And then in those times of escalate, negotiate, something happens that then's, okay, that has now crossed the line, and we bring China and Russia. And I remind everybody, and I said this very early on, and people thought I was being a doomsday analyst, and I'll tell you I'm not. This has all of the makings of a world war. World War I didn't start in a day. World War II didn't start overnight. And Americans typically put on their perspective of American history and thinking when the United States entered World War I or when the United States entered World War II. But the conditions of both of those wars and the conditions that led to them and the start of the war until the U.S. got involved was years. So does this right now have the makings of what could be a world war in terms of China, Russia, and Iran versus United States, Israel, and whomever else over the Strait of Hormuz, which then expands into other regional conflicts that we've seen in every world war that we have fought? This has all of those makings. And right now, we know that Iran is not going to come down one aspect of the conditions, because it is a matter of Iranian sovereignty, and it is a matter of Iranian military control in terms of their reasoning for the defense of their sovereignty. And we have a president who has said no, 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 no. So could this war go on for at least as long as this president's still in office? Sure. And we all know when Bush handed over the wars, that they continued. So I think that every American needs to have that realistic look, take off the rose-colored glasses and look and think that this could last years. And it sure does look that way.
And as Trump said, and you mentioned it earlier, that Americans need to deal with high gas prices because we need to make sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb, even though they've never tried to do so. We just got a Some more breaking news. This is a statement by Mohsin Rezai, the senior advisor to the leader of the Islamic Revolution. And he said, quote, the US president entered Beijing not from a position of strength, but under the heavy shadow of failure in the war with Iran, and left it with the same way. Seems to be basically what you were saying earlier. What's your thoughts on that? Iran seems to think that things didn't go as well as Trump believes in Beijing, and they've left with a even more position of weakness.
Yeah, Trump went into this position, going to kiss the ring. He went to King's Landing to kiss the ring, and he showed up thinking that this was America in control, and it's not. This is not the case. And I think that Donald Trump went in a position of weakness, and he has left in a position of weakness. And here's what we're going to see in the coming week as the administration touts its visit to China. Well, look, we got this Boeing deal. Yeah. And who's that going to benefit? Not any Americans. We got China to agree to X, Y, and Z in Iran. Well, that's simply not true. So I think next week, starting Monday, with the press coverage, we're going to see a lot of touting of China was a success. But anybody looking at this realistically and pragmatically can see: did we go in a position of weakness? We did. Did we leave in a position that was either equal to or weaker? We did. Anybody that thinks that we went into this with a position of strength or left in a strengthened position militarily, diplomatically, or economically, I'm sorry, you're just not living in reality.
And yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you there. The US empire is weakening significantly. We've talked about this quite a bit. And we talked about how the Gulf states are now moving away from China. We talked about South Korea and Japan moving away from America, going towards China. And when you look at China, they are holding a lot of the cards. At the same time, China has possibly 2 months of reserves of oil now. I know they had 30 vessels that came out yesterday, so that'll help them out quite a bit. But China can't keep this going for too long as well. And so I guess the question mark becomes, I believe, according to some analysts, Chinese oil reserves are about 2 to 3 months. Some say 4 or 5 months. But this war has been going on. We're on day 77. We're 2.5 months in. I know they've had some oil, but again, it's nowhere near the level they need. Is America maybe waiting to see how quickly China can fold?
Well, I think that's certainly on the mind of everybody, on the mind of the United States, on the mind of Iran, on the mind of Russia, on the mind of China. Who is going to fold? And everybody is looking at, you conduct analysis of the most dangerous and the most probable courses of action of both the enemy and how you would respond. And if, again, you can put on your CCP hat, you can put on your IRGC hat, you can put on your US hat, you can put on your Russia hat, put on your UAE hat, and look at it from each of those perspectives, not from the perspective of where you are and say, well, this is what I want, but put your hat on from that seat, from that perspective, from what they're looking at. So in this case, since you mentioned China, if I'm wearing my China hat right now as an analyst, I'm looking at that exact question. Who is going to fold? So I look at, well, what are my strengths? Strategic patience. I'm not involved in this war. I'm not wasting munitions. I'm not shooting. I don't have Chinese soldiers and sailors dying. So can I wait a little bit? I can. Is there an expiration to that waiting in terms of oil? There is. However, I can allow the U.S. to bleed out a little bit more before I have to lay my cards on the table. Because the truth is that, let's say you're at, this card analogy, we're all at a poker table. The United States has already had to lay out its cards. The U.S. cards are on the table. Not all of Iran's. Well, I would say that Iran's cards are on the table too, and they're not asking to trade any cards. Here you go. This is our deck. The U.S. cards are on the table, and they have to figure out: am I going to stand, or am I going to draw? So what is the U.S. going to do? But right now, China, Russia, Iran, or not Iran, but China, Russia, and other nations sitting around the table, their cards are still close to their chest. So we think we know what China's red line might be. But again, if I were a Chinese planner, if I were in the Chinese joint staff and I was presenting options to my leadership, I would say, okay, boss, check it out. Here's how much we have in oil reserve. Here's the absolute deadline to where we have to do something. Here's the time we have in between. Here's where things are okay. Here's where things get painful. Here's where things become impossible. In the time range of between okay, difficult, and impossible, within the difficult time range, it becomes impossible for the United States. So hold out into the range of difficult, because then we're in a position to where it's impossible for the other. That's how strategic planning works. That's what strategic planners do. You look at time and space analysis based on what the other has, based on what you have, based on what you're willing to do, etc. And the US cards are on the table. So if I'm China, I'm looking at that exact scenario, but then I'm also looking at what then do I do? When I get to the point of impossible, to where I have to have oil, I have to have it come through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, right now, I don't really have to test. I don't have to test it. I can hold. What is the US going to do? How is this going to unfold? Maybe it resolves before I have to lay my cards out. But then when there's a point where China has to lay its cards out, maybe that looks like we're going to risk putting our Chinese vessels in and out of the strait and see what the US does about it. Because what's the US going to do? Is the US going to shoot and destroy and sink a Chinese flagged vessel? Oh, now you're talking about a whole nother realm. So if you're China, you're looking at how long can I make it painful until I have to decide? And maybe I don't have to decide. And when I do have to decide, do I still hold the cards? Because if I do, I'm in the advantage. And that's what this is. This entire strategic situation is the parrying left and the parrying right, like in fencing, of who has the advantage when they have the advantage. And right now, in time and space, Iran maintains the advantage and China benefits from that.
One last question. I'm just looking at reports. Reports are coming out that since the war started, Iran has been able to maintain its oil levels at almost similar levels before the war. So they were selling about 3 million barrels a day. Now they're selling 2.85.
Oh, yeah.
And so they've got, but then remember, they're getting a lot more where the barrels were being sold at basically discounted prices. Now they're being sold at premium prices, whereas the other nations have dropped significantly. So Iran seems to be in a much better situation than the United States of America. And as you said, it depends on who holds out longest. What's your thoughts on this information?
Well, the United States is buying the last roll of toilet paper during the COVID pandemic, and Iran is giving it away like it's free. That's the analogy I draw, is that Iran has so much oil now, it can have a Black Friday give it away sale, and the United States is trying to maintain every drop. And when you look at something at this, I think many Americans look at this situation at the tactical and operational level and think the U.S. holds out the cards. We have an exquisite Navy. True. That's not what ends wars. That's not what wins wars. Strategy, the grand strategic level. And right now, when you think about it at the strategic level, we're seeing that the critical factor in this is not how many missiles you have, not if you have the best missiles, not if you have the best Navy. It's, can you hold on? And in holding on, what relative advantage do you gain? And is the relative advantage that you gain the important advantage? And the truth be it, this is not anti-American. This is just a fact. Iran maintains the relative advantage strategically because that is oil and the Strait of Hormuz, which they have.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, another question I have for you is, last question. Do you think there's a possibility the war starts this weekend, or do you think it's probably going to be a bit more, because he's just come back from China? Do you think he needs more time to kind of plan a prep, or do you think something like this could escalate this weekend?
Well, I do think, if I had an allotment of bingo cards, that the beginning of a war would always be on a Friday or a Saturday. I think that we've been conditioned to that.
Yeah.
Like a dog whistle, we've been conditioned to the fact that a war is likely going to start. Would it be this weekend? I'm not ruling it out, but that would be a stretch, because we just had the let's not forget U.S. Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, for lack of better terms, got his butt handed to him in Congress yesterday. That did not go well for him. So he's back in the U.S. right now. He's not at Forward Qatar. He's also waiting on the president to get back. So Brad Cooper, who typically sits at MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, who since the start of this war is spending a lot of time forward in Qatar. You know, Brad Cooper doesn't sit on an aircraft carrier with his captain's hat saying, I control the Navy. He sits in Qatar at Central Command forward. So he came back here to testify. That did not go well. I'm pretty sure Donald Trump watched that, and he has some words for Admiral Cooper. So I can anticipate when the president gets back, there's going to be a meeting with General Kane, Admiral Cooper, the president, Hegseth, because Hegseth's on the trip too. And they're all going to come together and they're going to figure out, okay, what's next? So could they be having that meeting on, you know, between the flight coming over and it? Sure, they could. So I'm not ruling out this weekend, but I think it's less likely. But would it happen on a Friday or Saturday weekend? Yeah, I'm you know, so next weekend, maybe, you know, why not kick it off on Memorial Day weekend to celebrate America's 250th? That's something the Trump administration would do. Operation Memorial Day. I can see Trump selling that.
Interesting. Anthony Aguilar, I know you're doing some really important work in North Carolina. And we honestly, all of us are behind you. We really want you to win, to fight against this AIPAC controlled, Israeli controlled government. How is it going?
You know what? Not only is it going well, it's going great. I feel that I have even a boost, if you will. I was aligned to the Green Party. And in that, you know, you're constrained by, you know, the party in terms of your position, what you can advocate, what you can't. And here's the truth that what I've now come to learn, I'm new to politics. You know, being in the military for as long as I was, new to this. But what I've realized is that the Green Party, they still take PAC money. They still take money from PACs and lobbyists and special interests. They denounce AIPAC, which I think a lot of people do now. They denounce super PACs, but they still take money from PACs. They still have positions that are quite concerning that I think aren't aligned to what the American people want and need. And we don't need a time of divisive. I'm not running independent, and I'm not running for Congress to be divisive to the other parties. I'm running to give Americans another option. I'm running to give Americans a choice. I'm running to give Americans power back in the Congress to where we no longer have to have this duality of party to where, for example, in the War Powers Resolution, if we had just 5 independent or third party, 5 members of our Congress that weren't Democrat or Republican, you would then have the ability to actually make change in the House. Right now, when you have, well, it's this way or this way, and if both of these sides are on the same side, well, then you really got one way. And if both these sides are split, well, then it's one or the other based on the vice president's breaking of the vote because we're at a deadlock, which happened twice. Having independent members in the Congress gives America the power back. Congress is of the people. This gives the people the power back. I'm not doing it for a party. I'm not doing it for a color. I'm not doing it for a slogan. I'm doing it because I want to bring power back for the American people, and I am best suited to do that independently. Now, does that make it more challenging? Yes and no. I'm still on the ballot. I was already on the ballot. I made it through the primary. I can't be taken off the ballot, but I can run whatever I want. So I'm running independent. I'm still on the ballot, and I need everyone's support. Does it get harder in terms of being independent and not have a party backing? Sure. But I'll tell you, the North Carolina Green Party was not providing much support anyway, so it's not a loss. So I'm still here. America, I need your support. Let's bring power back to the people, to Congress. I'm running as an independent with my own beliefs on what I stand for, and I think I'm your guy.
No doubt. And I'm actually happy to hear that you're not basically affiliated to the Green Party. Let's hope that things go well for you. I know people can find your website at Aguilar for Congress. So everyone do check it out. See if you can support Anthony in any way possible, whether it's if you're in America, whether it's via donation, or whether it's helping with leafleting or helping knocking on doors or whatever it may be if you're in the area. So everybody, make sure you help him out, because we can complain about Zionism, we can complain about foreign control of the government, we can complain about the fact that Americans aren't being put first, but the only way it can be done is by you putting the effort in. So really, I really appreciate you, and really do implore everybody to support you. Thank you so much for taking your time out to join us, Anthony.
Thank you. I'll see you soon, and have a great day. Thank you.
You too as well. Thank you so much. Always appreciate Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. Great person. Make sure you follow him. Also, like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. Like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on what he had to say. Went through a wide range of issues because there's a bit of news coming out while we were having that conversation. So let me know your thoughts on that. Now we're gonna be having who are we gonna have now? We got CIA Larry Johnson coming on. That's gonna be great. Always appreciate him. Always love him. It won't be too much of a long interview, and then we'll get back into the space. In the meantime, guys, retweet the space, reshare the space, let everybody know we're live. Let's try and get as many people in here as possible. In addition to that, if you're on the YouTube, we need the likes up, all the likes. Let's get the likes up as high as possible. Let's get the notifications on, guys. I'm producing a lot of content, trying to get as much content out as possible, as many interviews, information. We're already thinking about how to build even more on what we're doing. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you have your notifications on. It's the only place for real news. So if you could do that for me, that would be awesome. We should have on Larry coming on any minute now. Let me just see if there's any news. To be honest, I was giving you the news as and when we, we're doing the interview. So whenever a piece of news came out, I would read the news and just give it to Anthony to react to. That way, you were getting the news live, and then we were doing the interview as well. So that was my goal on that. So I hope it came across well. Let me just have a bit of tea. We got Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. We've got some more news. I didn't mention this one to him because I thought maybe it wouldn't make as much relevance. But so let me just give it to you that. So this piece of news is that apparently Iranian hackers have breached gas station tank readers in several US states, and so they're able to mess with the gas stations or the numbers on them in order to make it look like there's less gas or more gas or cause a leak or whatever. So that's going to be interesting to see first. And this is according to CNN, so it seems like it's legitimate news. And it does seem like this Iran has possibly breached, according to CNN, for that. Now, so the White House, I'm just reading this. The White House said Xi agreed the Strait of Hormuz must stay demilitarized and that China opposes any toll by Iran. Now, China had their own information about the meeting, and I'm just reading that now. Let me see what China had to say. China says no mention of Iran, no mention of the Hormuz. They said China supports Iran's sovereignty. So the Chinese readout is totally different to the American readout. And you saw that as well. When Trump was asked by Hannity, he was asked about Hannity by Hannity, and he said, they said, did you mention to China, did she agree with you that Iran shouldn't have nuclear? He said, I mentioned it, but he didn't really give a response. So this entire White House brief is literally the figment of their imagination. It's actual fake news. That is crazy. Like, they just made it up. And that's the kind of problems that the United States of America has, because they essentially have to make things up because things are going not too great for them in terms of what's happening in the Strait. Okay, sorry, when I look down, it's because I think there's going to be some breaking news, so apologies for that. I think we need to move the mic there as all people arrive, so when I'm reading the news, you can still hear the mic, so we'll try and get that sorted as well. Okay, so guys, a retweet, reshare, let everybody know we're live. Let me just see if he's messaged. Yeah, okay, brilliant. He's here. Just to get him. I just want to welcome CIA Larry Johnson onto the show. Appreciate you taking your time out to join us. How are you?
I thought I was going to get promoted. Damn.
I'm trying my best to promote you, Larry.
Let's next time make it general.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's Admiral. But Larry, are you learning Mandarin?
No, I'm working on Russian.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because the United States of America, Donald Trump went to a meeting in China. They went with Elon Musk. Apparently, Elon Musk's son is learning Mandarin.
Yeah.
A lot of big tech oligarchs. I want your general thoughts about the meeting, but then I've got some specific questions because there's a lot of claims being made by the White House about the China basically turning on Iran. So what's your thoughts?
This was a nothing burger for Trump. The Chinese set expectations very low, and they were not disappointed. The day before Trump arrived, the front page of the China Daily talked about the meeting between Xi and Tajikistan's president. The only mention of the upcoming meeting with Trump, which was to take place in less than 14 hours from that when that headline appeared, was a little sidebar that was talking more about Xi than just mentioned Trump in passing. None of the major websites the day before had any mention whatsoever that Trump was coming to town. Then the flags that were on the route from the airport into Beijing, they still had the Tajik flag up, last I saw. Whereas, if they were really preparing for a major visit, they would have put the U.S. flag up next to the Chinese flag. And most importantly was at the greeting at the airport. The vice premier, basically the number 3 guy in the Chinese government, was there to greet Trump. Now that's sort of, let's call it, that's normal protocol for your run-of-the-mill statesman. But when Vladimir Putin shows up, Xi is there at the airport. When Kim Jong-un visited China, Xi was there at the airport. Here comes Trump, no Xi. So the Chinese were sending, they have a great way of sending subtle messages, symbolic messages. This is to Trump, you're not that important. And then the fact that this was not handled like what I'd call a regular diplomatic session, because normally a regular diplomatic session has the meeting of the Sherpas. A Sherpa is, it's a term associated with mountaineering. The poor Nepalese that have to carry all the crap for all the rich Westerners up Mount Everest. They're the ones that do the actual work. But then it's the great white folk from the West that come in and get to celebrate. Oh, I summited Everest. I climbed it all on my own with the help of all of my little brown buddies carrying my luggage for me. Well, the Sherpas in diplomatic talk are the ones who actually work out the agreements, they work out the language, they agree on what's going to be done. They didn't have any of that. So this is like show up and say, hey, what's up? And that's why, to my knowledge, there was not a joint statement released at the end in which they pledged and said, here's what we agreed on. Here's what we agreed to do. And instead it was Trump saying, oh yeah, I got him. Well, I had him right where I wanted him. It is the tendency of Trump to exaggerate. I did hear from a source inside the White House that was familiar with what had transpired. And basically they said Xi Jinping on the issue of Iran told Trump to go pound sand, that China is not going to lift a finger, that the United States created this problem, and from China's perspective, the United States needs to get out and withdraw. So, Trump can put as much lipstick as he wants on this pig, it's still a pig.
And so, okay, and we saw that, right? With the two statements that came out, they were diametrically different. The Chinese statement didn't really mention Iran at all, other than saying that they have the sovereign right to, they respect Iran's sovereign rights. Right. Trump made the claim that China had agreed that basically Iran can't militarize the Strait of Hormuz. They can't charge a toll, that the strait needs to open, and that China was going to buy oil from the United States of America. What's your thoughts on those elements?
No to all of the above. I mean, it's again, Trump lying is about the best way to put it. China doesn't need to buy oil from the United States. China's got plenty of oil that it's buying from Brazil, from Russia, from Nigeria, from other countries around the world. He may have said that to placate. Oh yeah, it's like if you've gone out on a date, with whether if you're dating a girl or a guy, and at the end of the day say, hey, look, this is great. We'll be calling you, and you don't call. Yeah, it wasn't that special. That's what went on here. The Chinese aren't going to be calling up the United States and saying, "Oh yeah, we need to buy your oil." No, they don't. We want to buy some more soybeans. That's not likely to happen. But it is. China did gestures. They were not insulting Trump, but at the same time, they were not embracing Trump's agenda at all. And again, in the private talks where Trump tried to get them on board to put pressure on Iran, China said no, because the reality is China and Russia are working together behind the scenes to create a new security architecture in the Persian Gulf that is going to force the United States out militarily. That's what they're working on, and they're doing it through Pakistan. I've got that 100% confirmed.
And when you look at G and the way he's basically dealt with Trump, he obviously did not agree to his overtures. But what was Trump's psychology for this meeting? And what I mean by that is he took all of the corporations, he took all of the oligarchs, and all the names were there, whether it's the head of NVIDIA, whether it was Elon Musk, whether it's the head of Visa or MasterCard, whomever it is, they were all there. What's the reason for taking the entire oligarch and corporations to China?
Well, I guess his hope was to persuade the Chinese that we've got the full backing of all these major tech firms who, candidly, what they want to get business in China. They're not looking for the Chinese to do business with them per se. These companies need the Chinese market, and so she could entertain them and talk to them, but like the reality is take the electric vehicle market, Tesla was somewhat the pioneer on that, but now China is surpassing them. They may have Trump's goal may have been to try to get the Chinese to agree to allow more Teslas to be sold in China, but my understanding is the Chinese electric vehicles actually now surpass Tesla in quality, and they certainly are less expensive.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. When you look at the advancements of Chinese electric vehicles, they far surpass Tesla. This is why the United States of America and Canada don't allow Chinese electric vehicles to operate. I thought we have a free market. I thought it's non-monopolization. I thought we live in capitalism, but they don't allow them to operate because they know as soon as they allow a competitor to operate in Northern America, no one's going to buy Teslas and everyone's going to buy the BYUs or various others. And this is why with the Canadians, I believe the Canadians are planning to allow the Chinese market in. It's going to be the complete decimation of Tesla, right?
Yeah. Or Tesla's going to have to compete. Tesla's going to have to find out how to cut expenses and still maintain quality. They said that is capitalism. What we've had up to here is sort of state-run monopoly. And so it is. I honestly don't know what Trump. I don't know if he hoped it would intimidate Xi, if it would be intimidate the Chinese, but they weren't intimidated at all, and it did not lead to any significant breakthroughs. China warned the United States, keep your damn hands off of Taiwan. If you meddle in Taiwan, it could lead to war between us. I wish I was there when Xi first broke out the Thucydides trap. When he mentioned that, I bet you everyone on Trump's delegation were Googling as quickly as possible Thucydides. How do you spell Thucydides? And they wanted to see what's he talking about. I'd be surprised if there was even one person on his delegation who knew what he was talking about. But the fact that Xi used a sophisticated term, historical term, showed you what he had in mind. Because the reality is, the United States was the world leader in technology, could be considered the world leader in industry at one point. But that's no longer the case. So right now, the entire fate of the United States to retain its status as the global hegemon resides on two things. The petrodollar, ensure that everybody who's buying oil is buying it with dollars, not yuan, not some other currency. And number two, that the rest of the world is buying our treasury bills so that we can continue to finance our enormous deficits. And what's happening on those two issues? The dollar is falling. It's no longer the currency. It's no longer the dominant currency for purchasing oil, as an example. So Iran's purchasing oil with yuan, or the Chinese are using yuan in the Iranian currency. The same for Russia, Brazil. So the demand for U.S. dollars is plummeting, and as it plummets, that means the price of the dollar falls as well. Then you've got the issue of debt. And instead of these countries loading up on U.S. debt, the interest rates are now up for, I see the 30-year was like 5%, which is extraordinarily high. Nobody's buying. So they keep having to raise the rates in order to try to attract buyers. Meanwhile, countries, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, they are offloading dollars. They're offloading their treasury bills, and they're buying gold and silver. So the two things that the United States has as its pillars to maintain its hegemonic status, they're falling apart.
Yeah. Now, in terms of China, I still think that they don't want to go down that road, obviously. One of the things, though, is, and I didn't fully understand, maybe you've got some information on this. Trump came out afterwards and said, when Xi said that America is a falling power, he didn't mean me, he meant Biden. Yeah. He wasn't talking about the current government, he was talking about the Biden government. And in reality, I agree with him. Now, what was he referring to when he was talking about that?
What was she referring to?
Trump. So
Trump is just in denial. He's trying to pretend that he wasn't talking about me. He absolutely was talking about you, Donald. Show us one area where you're exceeding China. How about industrial output? Yeah, China's got the edge there. How about literacy rates? Boom. China's got the edge there. How about production of hypersonic missiles? Boom. China's got the edge there. How about the number of ships building? Boom. China's got the edge there. I mean, where is the evidence that the U.S. universities, that you've got more and more of our people seeking to get into our top universities? That's not happening either. It's starting to shift to China. So, every I defy, come up with an objective measure that you'd use to compare countries. And I'll be willing to bet that 90% of them favor China, which is a sign that's what has changed. All that's changed in 25 years.
I guess
10, how many top 10, how many US banks versus Chinese banks are in the top 10 banks? China's got 4, US has got 2.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, I think I probably wasn't very clear, that there seems to be a statement made by Xi. I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it. So I don't know if it's public or if you know about this, but it seems like what Xi said was America is a decline in power. And then obviously Trump tried to play politics and say, oh, look, he's not talking about me, he's talking about Biden, which shows his weakness. But did Xi say that, or is this just him?
Yeah, no, I read that as well. I can't put my fingers on it right away. Let me see here. I thought I could have, when did she refer to the U.S. as a declining power? We'll find out here. I gotta stand by here. Let's see what the answer is. I can give it to you here in a second. Yeah. But yeah, he's it says she has not frequently used the exact phrase declining power or declining nation, but he has repeatedly endorsed the broader narrative that the East is rising, the West is declining. So, and they give the I guess the Chinese word for it is Dongshang Xijiang, which implicitly frames the U.S. and West as is in relative decline.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I guess during the summit, when Xi invoked the Thucydides trap in his opening remarks, he asked whether China and the U.S. could overcome that trap, which the Thucydides trap is about an established hegemon, read U.S., and against a rising power. And that inevitably, or at least Graham Allison claimed it inevitably leads to war. That's not true. But implicit in it was referring to the United States as a declining nation.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I was just trying to figure out whether he actually said it during the meeting, because I didn't see any reports on it. So I thought there might be some kind of inside information on it. I mean, I saw Trump's statement on it, but I didn't find the actual origin video that he was referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So now coming back to the conversation that we're having, one of the other things he mentioned in the statement, something we talk about quite a bit, is he said, and Iran, and we've also obliterated, or something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing now, we've fought Iran, or we've obliterated Iran, and then he wrote, to be continued. So it seems to be suggesting kinetic war. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think Trump is going to order a renewed attack on Iran. The question remains, will it take place? Because if the Chinese and Russians are successful in proposing to Saudi Arabia and Qatar to basically withdraw from the U.S. security umbrella, which means get the U.S. military bases out of their country and refuse to allow their countries to be used as launching pads for U.S. attacks on Iran. If those two countries come out now and tell U.S. no, then the U.S. is going to be hard pressed to figure out what to do, because I'm sure Kuwait will follow suit, Bahrain will, UAE is a little bit up in the air, but once they see the other four Gulf states go that way, I think they're going to feel compelled to go along with the crowd. So this is, if Trump gets his way, if those countries cooperate, I think he's going to launch renew attacks on Iran within the next week.
And that's what one other question on this, and then I've got some questions on the UAE. So he was flying back. Obviously, he could be having these discussions on the flight back. So. Right. Is it likely it could be this weekend, or more like? But then next weekend is what, the 250-year anniversary, and doesn't he need to kind of make sure, like, what does that make it less likely or more likely?
Well, the 250 anniversary of what?
It was the 250-year anniversary of it slipped my mind now, but let me check. But it slipped my mind now. But it says it's the 250-year anniversary of. Someone in the chat can remind me.
Yeah, I mean July 4th.
That's July 4th, but there's something else that is in next week. I can't remember what it was, but I'll check it. But anyway,
okay.
Do you think it's do you think so? What I guess my main question was: do you think it's going to be this weekend in terms of the attack, or do they need a bit more time to kind of plan, get Trump in the right position or where he needs to be?
They've had it planned out for weeks. I mean, the ceasefire went into effect on April 15, so that's 4 weeks ago, right? 4 or 5 weeks ago now. So they've had more than enough time to plan, and I know that the plans are in place. It's just a matter of Trump ordering it. So assuming they've got the cooperation of the Saudis and Qataris and Kuwaitis, then I anticipate that they could be giving the orders to launch by Monday at the latest. But then a lot depends upon what the subordinate military commanders are coming back and telling both General Kane, at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and telling Trump that any further military attacks of that nature are going to significantly drain U.S. inventories of critical weapon systems that we do not have many of. And Trump came back from China without a promise on the rare earths. You know, to make new Tomahawks, to make new JASSMs, to make new Patriot 3, PAC-3 missiles, to make new THAAD interceptors, they need rare earth minerals. To make F-35 radars, they need rare earth minerals. And China's saying, no, they're not going to provide that, because for the simple reason it's being used to produce weapons that'll be used against China. So that factor, that's another factor that could weigh in, that could prevent Trump from launching any attacks.
Okay, we'll see. Now, in terms of the UAE, we had some kind of weird situation occur between the UAE and Israel yesterday. Well, it led up to yesterday, which was, there was a report by Israel saying that Netanyahu, including key Israeli personnel, had flown to the UAE during the Iran war. And this included Netanyahu, the head of the IDF, the head of the army, and various other personnel. The UAE came out and denied it. And then what happened was the UAE, they came out and denied it. Then we got OSINT accounts and satellite accounts that demonstrated that there was a flight that went from Israel to the UAE during the war. And then Israel said, not only did all those people go, but the head of the IDF also went. What's going on there? What is the reason for why this was leaked? Why would UAE deny it? Why would there be this kind of divergence in what happened?
Yeah, Israel's trying to sow division among the members of the Persian Gulf, number one, and trying to force UAE's hand. And here's the UAE. In fact, one of the other Emirates, because there are seven, I believe there are seven different tribes, really, in the United Arab Emirate. One of those tribes came out with the harshest language, condemning Israel and not wanting to have anything to do with it. So this is now sparking even greater division within the UAE, not to mention within the Gulf.
That was Sharjah. Sharjah came out and said that they don't agree, but the other six Emirates are in line. I mean, one of the attacks on Iran happened from Ras Al Khaimah. I believe another one happened in Ajman. So I do think the other Emirates are kind of on board. And that's what doesn't make sense to me. I see the UAE has been so on board with Israel in almost everything they did, to the extent where they even carried out attacks on Karg Island. And then we got reports recently that they actually carried out more attacks on Iran. I just can't see a scenario where there would be some kind of disagreement between them. So I can't see the logic behind why this was made public. There's no need to pressure a country that's already in bed with you.
Well, once the word gets out that this new security architecture constructed by Russia and China is going into place, you're going to see a change of heart on the part of the UAE. They'll recognize they bet on the wrong horse. You know, they were betting that the United States and Israel are going to prevail. They're not. And once it becomes clear that they're not, the UAE is going to choose to go with the winner, which will be Russia and China.
Yeah, okay. So you think that they're going to have to flip because of what's happening in terms of...
Self-preservation.
But they already left OPEC. They've already kind of separated themselves from the Gulf states. I don't know. Maybe they're floundering, but just the whole thing doesn't... But we'll have to see.
Yeah, you can always change your mind. They can always turn around and say, oops, we're sorry, our bad. We want to come back in. So, yeah, the UAE is probably the weakest of the Gulf states. When you go through there are five main commodities that come out of the Gulf: oil, liquid natural gas, urea, sulfur, helium. The main exporter of oil, 36% of the oil coming out of the Gulf comes out of Saudi Arabia. Second is, it's Kuwait, and then the UAE gets in there, but that's about it. But LNG, that's all Qatar. Helium, that's Qatar. And urea, that's Qatar, Saudi, that's spread around the Gulf. And sulfur, that's primarily Saudi Arabia. So UAE is not a major energy exporter. It gets enough to build all these extravagant public projects. but it really is not in the same league as, say, the Saudis or even the Qataris. So I think as the Chinese-Russian plan progresses, the UAE is going to look around and say, you know what, we need to go with them. They're the winners.
Well, yeah, they kind of built themselves as like separate of the degeneracy they're part of, but they built themselves as like a financial hub. And obviously, what's happened with the wars, that's caused them a huge amount of problems. They've had to not allow people to take money out of the Emirates. They've had to force people to stay within the Emirates. They've had to ask for a credit line from the United States of America. So the main aspect that their kind of job is, which is they're like a financial hub in the DIFC, which is, and even the DIFC, is like based on British law, they kind of are stuck in that aspect, right?
Correct. So,
yeah. So now, you think that there is a highly likely that the war's gonna restart. I spoke to Colonel Wilkinson, and thank you so much for that. He basically said that he believed when you look at the firepower that's around the Gulf, even though from volume it seems more, but from ability in terms of the penetration, it's not as voluminous as it was prior. And he thinks that if they were to start the war, they could only last about 11 days before they basically, their weaponry, the armory, the bombs become critical. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think he's exactly right. The number one, the Gulf Arabs don't have much military power to project. They're very, very limited. And they're using weapons supplied by the United States that are in short supply. And the United States does not have both the industrial capability and the raw materials needed to produce more of those weapons. So they're caught. And it's one of the things that I think there's hesitancy on the part of the U.S. military to restart the war, simply because they know, within about 2 weeks, they could actually be running out of weapons.
We also had a report a couple of hours before you came on, which said that they're extending the ceasefire in Lebanon by 45 days. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it would be, there's no ceasefire right now. I mean, that's just a paper exercise. It's ostensibly a ceasefire, yet the fighting's going on in the south, and the Israelis continue to bomb Lebanon. So, it's been meaningless.
No, I totally agree with you. It's just a charade. But because in reality, there's never been a day that they've not bombed. And never mind since this war, since 2024, they've bombed almost every single day and killed civilians almost every single day. So I'm in agreement with you. Now, one of the things they mentioned within there was that the Israelis and the Lebanese government were going to work together and get the Lebanese army to possibly disarm Hezbollah. What's your thoughts on that?
Mission impossible. Hezbollah's got far more military strength than the Lebanese military, and they've been, that's been a pipe dream. Let's see, the war started in 1975. So that's been a pipe dream for 51 years. Not going to happen.
No doubt it's not going to happen. But the question mark becomes, if the Lebanese army is given those orders, do they reject those orders? I believe that in the past, when that's attempted to happen, the head of the Lebanese army has rejected those orders, but they could just possibly replace him with someone else. Do they reject those orders? Does the Lebanese army become part of Hezbollah? Like, what happens if there's some kind of pressure done? Or do you think this is just vague statements which will never even effectuate in reality?
Well, I mean, the reality is there's nobody in the West that can pressure Lebanon into that. The United States doesn't have that leverage. No country does. So we can threaten, and we can try to say, we'll give you some more aid here and there. But the reality is the Lebanese are largely immune to that kind of pressure. And so it had to be their own decision. And so far, if anything, they're going to side with Hezbollah, not against it. Because it'd be one thing if Israel is just killing Hezbollah members, but they're killing Christians, they're killing other members of Lebanese society. So they've really further alienated Lebanon.
I completely agree with you. And so I mean, we'll have to wait and see. You believe that the war is going to be coming soon. I think so too. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Everyone should be following your Substack, Larry, which is Sonar21, as well as your website, which is Sonar21. You already came out with the article today. It was last night because I saw it on my alert, but I didn't have a chance to read it. I'm going to read it after the various interviews I've done. But yeah, you got some great content there, Larry. So everyone should definitely be following you.
Yeah, last night, which of the Gulf Arab countries are most important to the global economy? So when you go down and look at it, you begin to realize that Saudi Arabia and Qatar really are the two most important countries in the Gulf for the global economy. And the cutoff of oil, of LNG, of urea, of sulfur, helium, that is devastating effects for the world economy. We just have yet to fully appreciate how bad it's going to be.
No doubt. Completely agree with you. Everyone should read that article as well. I'm going to read it after we've done all the show. But I appreciate you taking your time out, Larry. As always, really appreciate you.
All right, Suleiman, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Take care.
Appreciate you as always. That was Larry Johnson. What's your thoughts on what he said? He said, and he believed the China meeting was not beneficial. It was essentially a waste of time. Nothing concrete came from it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe. Notifications on all. Right, we're going to be moving to the space. So if someone can put in the chat the other channel, because we're going to be moving to the other channel on YouTube. So if someone can do that for me, that would be awesome. And let me set it up. I've already had it ready. So let me do that now. Let's just start in the other stream. Okay, so I've just started it. So as soon as people get there, let me know if it's working. And yeah, we're live. We're going to be back on the space. We're going to hear what everyone on the panel has to say about the upcoming news that's happened, and maybe they want to even comment on what the experts had to say as well. Wendy's there already. Wendy, let me know if it's working on this channel. Appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you got your notifications on this channel. There's a lot of content coming out from here. I'm gonna pin because Sida's pinned the link, so everyone come across. We will see you on the second channel as we run the space. I appreciate you guys joining in.